Today we're out here in sunny Palm Springs taking a look at the all-new 2017 Acura NSX. Let's dive right under the small hood first because it is key to understanding the NSX. Under here you won't find an engine. That's because the engine is actually in the back of the vehicle, but you will find two 36 horsepower electric motors. 72 horsepower total can be sent right here to the front axle and 108 pound-feet of torque. What makes this system unique is it can actually control each of those motors independently. So the system can actually send 36 horsepower to one front wheel, and it can actually try and regenerative brake the other wheel. In the back we find a unique 3.5-liter V6 engine. This is a 75-degree angle V6 instead of the typical 60 or 90. This engine alone produces 500 horsepower and 406 pound-feet of torque thanks to twin turbochargers and just over 15 psi of boost. This is a mid-engine design, meaning that the engine is actually in front of the rear axle, and you'll actually find the cargo area right back here between the engine and the rear bumper. The NSX is a hybrid supercar, but unlike some of the other hybrids out there that we've seen, this is not a through-the-road hybrid. So there actually is a 47 horsepower pancake motor mated directly to the engine. So it goes engine, 47 horsepower motor, then we get the dual clutch 9-speed automatic transmission, and then the wheels. When this motor and the two motors up front and the engine are all working together, total system horsepower comes in at 573 horsepower and 476 pound-feet of torque. It's good for 21 miles per gallon combined. In EV mode, which is used in somewhat of a limited fashion in the quiet mode of this drivetrain or when starting you from a stop, the electric motors are capable of delivering up to 110 horsepower combined. Some of the interesting styling and aerodynamic touches we see on this vehicle are this sort of flying buttress quarter panel. It's actually part of this section of the vehicle right here. You can actually stick your hand all the way through there. That's actually to help improve aerodynamics. It allows air to flow across the side of the vehicle and help keep the back end pushed down at higher speeds. This may be about the same size as a Porsche 911, but it's actually about 200 pounds heavier because of the batteries and the hybrid system. In order to help control that power, we do have 305 with 20-inch wheels and tires in the back, and there are a variety of different tire options to choose from. There's some track-focused tires, and there are these very street-focused tires that this model is wearing at the moment. The styling of the NSX is not only aesthetic, but it's also functional. This is all about getting air in the vehicle and then getting air back out again. That's why we have these very large sort of egg crate openings at the bottom of the bumper. It's hard to see in the video, but we even actually have air outlets right up here, right above the tail lamp modules, which are full LEDs in this vehicle. At the bottom of the bumper, we have these small fins to help smooth out the airflow, and you'll notice we have 4 exhaust tips right here underneath the license plate. It doesn't use all 4 at the same time. It actually uses the outboard ones when it's in the quieter modes, and it uses the inner ones to help improve flow. It actually almost completely bypasses the muffler. Taking a quick look at the interior, you can see that our model does have the optional Alcantara headliner. We actually have a little bit more headroom than you might suspect in a vehicle like this. It's all because of the way that ceiling is shaped in the vehicle. Now, at 6 feet tall, I did have troubles wearing a helmet in the car, but I think shorter people should be okay. The seat belts in the NSX are attached directly to the seat frame there. We don't have any provision for 5-point harnesses in this vehicle, and our model does have the standard leather and Alcantara seats. There are 3 different kinds of seats available in this vehicle. There's an all-leather version that's optional. There's also an upper-level seat that still has the Alcantara inserts, however, it uses a better quality leather. In the center of the dash, we have a standard 7-inch touchscreen infotainment system, which is quite new for Acura. We have seen something very similar in other Honda models, but this is the first time we've seen it in an Acura model. This does offer Apple CarPlay and Android Auto support right here on the screen, so that also makes this the first Acura model to do so. If you were hoping that Acura would return to a more traditional gear shift, then you may be a little bit disappointed. We find the same button arrangement that we see in the MDX and the other Acura models. Over on the driver's side, we see Acura's first LCD instrument cluster. Now, this is a combination physical and digital gauge. So the 2 dials we see, one on the left and one on the right, these are actually physical. So the fuel level and this engine temperature, those are real. Everything else is actually part of the LCD. You notice that we have this chrome ring sort of running right here around the tachometer. That's actually a physical ring that floats right in front of the LCD to give it a little bit more of a physical look. The NSX uses a unique Acura steering wheel with a flat bottom and a flat top. It is in carbon fiber in our particular model. There may be some additional trim options at a later date. It's leather wrapped, and Acura is very proud of the fact that they didn't leave any open seams. So you can see they actually wrap the leather completely around and then actually stitch it together on the inside so that way there's nothing to interfere with your hand. The steering wheel also curves around inwards towards the back to give you a better grip on the steering wheel instead of leaving you to have your hand sort of in a cookie holding shape. The first thing we should talk about are the drive modes in the NSX. There are 4 different ones. We have Quiet, we have Sport, Sport Plus, and Track. The modes affect the way not only the drivetrain and the suspension and the steering behave, but also the way the hybrid all-wheel drive system behaves. You can think of quiet mode sort of like your average hybrid sedan out there. This will actually try and start off from a stoplight or a stop sign in EV mode for a short while, and then it will actually engage the engine. If you're coming into a stoplight that's red or a stop sign, something along those lines, and you're slowing down, the engine will turn off in advance to help save gas. The next mode is sport mode, and you can sort of think of that as the standard mode for the NSX. In this mode, the hybrid system will still stop the engine when you stop at a stoplight to help save gasoline, but everything is going to be a little bit sharper, a little bit crisper. Engaging Sport Plus takes things up to the next level. It firms up the suspension even further, holds those gears even longer, and then we have the track mode. In track mode, this system holds the gears for a ridiculously long amount of time, so you definitely don't want to use that one in the city, but if you're out here on roads like this, it can be an awful lot of fun. Now, you should be warned that track mode does reduce the vehicle stability control system, so you can get into trouble a little bit faster. In our quick 0 to 60 tests out here in the desert at 90 degrees, this ran from 0 to 60 repeatedly with launch control at 3.4 seconds. That's very quick for this segment. Definitely puts that between the 911 4S and the 911 Turbo. Now, I have seen 0 to 60 times that have been shorter than that, so keep in mind that we were driving a pre-production model. The model was in the desert at 90 degrees and had been doing back-to-back launch control starts, so that likely has caused that 0 to 60 time to increase a little bit. The takeaway, however, for me is that this hybrid system doesn't really suffer from 0 to 60 slowdowns like we see in your average hybrid system. Remember that this engine alone in the back is producing 500 horsepower, so it's really not depending on the hybrid system an awful lot to increase power. Instead, with the NSX, what they're really using the hybrid system for is the torque vectoring up front to give you additional steering basically in the vehicle. They call it yaw. Basically, they can either overdrive one wheel or they can actually drag one wheel to cause the front of the vehicle to actually turn. And that causes the NSX to feel very nimble out on the road. It really makes the front of the vehicle go exactly where you point it. But they also use the hybrid system to help augment power at low RPMs. Turbocharged engines, of course, don't produce that much power at those low RPMs. I'm talking about perhaps below about 1500 RPM or so, and that's where the electric motors come in. Because the electric motors are producing almost all of their torque from 0 to about 2000 RPM, and this engine starts producing all of its torque at 2000 RPM. So the two technologies mate very, very well together, giving you that maximum acceleration. It's very noticeable when you do use launch control, because the 72 horsepower electric motors up front are using all of their power to start the vehicle from 0. In dual clutch vehicles, since we don't have a torque converter, you do have to basically slip the clutch in order to get the vehicle moving. And in that sort of 1/10 of a second at the beginning of the acceleration run, that's where those electric motors up front really come into play. Keep in mind that in the back, the electric motor is actually tied to the engine, so it's actually between the transmission and the engine. That means it does have to go through those dual clutches as well. Interestingly enough, braking is also another area where the hybrid system benefits us. Unlike other vehicles that are rear-wheel drive, we have those electric motors up front. And remember that the front wheels in a car are doing the majority of the braking. So rear-wheel drive hybrids like you see in some of the BMW models can't really provide that much regenerative braking because you don't really want to drag the rear wheels in a vehicle in that manner. By putting the electric motors up front, Acura allows us to do much more regenerative braking than we see in your average luxury car hybrid. Again, not only can Acura brake the front wheels with those electric motors, they can actually choose to power one while braking the other, so it can actually regenerate power with one electric motor, use that same power to power the other side. That, coupled with the slight rear weight bias, causes us to feel very nimble out on the road, very much like a Porsche 911. When it comes to handling, it really depends on what tire package you get. I have seen a few people complain about the fact that the NSX starts out with a street-oriented tire. You can opt for a track-oriented tire as well. That actually makes sense for the average NSX buyer because this is trying to compete with something like a Porsche 911. The average 911 driver doesn't drive their car on a track every day. They commute to work with it, they go away on weekends with it, and that tire will give you much longer tire life than you would with a dedicated sport summer tire. Sport summer tire on a vehicle like this, you could experience tire tread wear life under 5,000 miles. Something like the base tire in the NSX should give you about 15,000 miles or so with daily driving in mind. And you can still take it to the track if you want to, but it's not really its mission. That tire is really intended for street use. Also, perhaps an interesting thing to say about a supercar is that one of the assets of the NSX is its compliant ride. It does, of course, firm up if we put this vehicle into some of the more advanced modes like Sport Plus. You can definitely tell there's a difference. But when we're operating in quiet mode, if you're just driving the car to the office, it's definitely a livable kind of vehicle. And that's not something you can say about every sports car out there. In a similar vein, the NSX also has relatively low tire noise, which actually surprised me because 305 width tires in the back are quite wide and you're very close to them in a mid-engine sports car like this. We don't really get that much road or wind noise in the NSX. The biggest takeaway really with the NSX is how easy this is to live with for a supercar. Some supercars out there feel like they're secretly plotting against you while you're driving them.